Cyber Traps, Introduction to Cyber Deception, Taking Back the Advantage from Attackers. My name is Kevin Fiscus. I'm a principal instructor with the SANS Institute. I regularly teach classes on hacker techniques, penetration testing, incident response, and I'm also the lead author for SANS Security 550, Cyber Deception, Attack Detection, Disruption, and Active Defense. What we're going to do today is spend a little bit of time talking about the topic of cyber deception. So we're going to really lay out what are the problems that we're trying to solve, what cyber deception is, and how it solves those problems. So we're going to start off with sort of an introductory view of cyber deception. Once we understand kind of the basics, we're going to spend some time talking about some frequently asked questions that pop up when we talk about cyber deception. And then we're going to get into a little bit more advanced understanding of the full value proposition of cyber deception. Now, to jump into this, I want to highlight a topic. There's an author by the name of Dr. Barton Whaley, and he wrote a lot of books where he's done research on military deception. In Dr. Whaley's book, Practice to Deceive, he wrote, in quote, in combat, deception strengthens the weaker side. When all other factors are equal, the more deceptive player or team will always win. Now, we're going to keep coming back to that quote, but the key pieces here is deception provides an advantage to anyone using it. Now, if you happen to be less powerful than your adversary, deception could sort of equalize the playing field. If you happen to be more powerful than your adversary, deception almost guarantees a win. So let's talk a little bit about the problems that we're running into and why deception may be the answer to those problems. So according to the 2021 Ponemon Institute Cost of a Data Breach Study, the average amount of time that it takes an organization to detect and then effectively respond to a breach is 287 days. That's over 9 months. In other words, if a breach happened on January 1st, it would not be detected and then effectively responded to until sometime in October. Now, let's break that 287 days down. Of that, the amount of time that it takes the average organization to simply detect the breach is 212 days. So that same breach occurring on January 1st isn't even going to be detected, again, on average, until sometime in July. Right? That is a huge problem. Well, why is it a problem? Intuitively, we know it's a problem, but why specifically is it a problem? Well, also according to the Ponemon Institute Cost of a Data Breach Study, they have identified, and this identification has been consistent year after year after year, going back 2015 was, I think, the first study that I saw. There is a direct correlation between the amount of time that it takes to detect and respond to a breach and the cost of that breach. In fact, faster detection and response can actually reduce breach costs in excess of 35%. So our inability to effectively detect and then to rapidly respond, efficiently respond to breaches, is meaning that the breaches are costing us significantly more than they otherwise would need to. So this is obviously a problem that needs to be addressed. In order to address the problem, we need to understand why it is the case. I mean, let's face it. After all, we have tons of security technologies that we use. Everything from protective controls like firewalls, access control lists. We have detective controls, intrusion detection systems. We have things that sort of blend between detective and protective, with different types of antivirus solutions that are out there, EDR solutions, XDR solutions. We have tons of technology. So why is it that it's taking us so long to detect and respond to breaches? And I would put out there that the reason is largely related to deception. Bad guys use deception against us. Anything that we would classify as social engineering falls into a category of deception. And then with subcategories of things like phishing, spear phishing, drive-by attacks, watering hole attacks, even methods that attackers use to evade detection, to evade our security controls, often involve some use of deception. And this has been going back quite literally decades. Some of you may have heard of an individual by the name of Kevin Mitnick. Now, depending upon when and where you learned of Kevin, he is either viewed as a notorious hacker or a current computer security professional. And really, both of those are true. Back in the mid-90s, Kevin Mitnick was a notorious computer hacker. And while he did absolutely use technical exploits in what he did, he was most noted for social engineering. So we're literally talking about using deception back in the mid-90s. And quite honestly, the overall concept of deception goes back thousands of years. So the attackers are using deception against us, and therefore they are gaining an advantage. In other words, in combat, deception strengthens the weaker side. So as we look at deception and detection, why is it that our detective controls do such a bad job when combating deception? Well, you got to remember that our detective controls are static. What I mean by that is they are programmed to do certain things. Those controls do exactly what they're programmed to do, but they don't do anything else. So once the attacker understands what the control they're trying to evade does and what it doesn't do, all they need to do is make sure their actions don't fall into a category that would be detected by the specific control. In other words, attackers, or let me back up. In other words, our current security controls look for evil, and attackers make evil look not evil. And that becomes the core problem when it comes to detecting the bad guys. Now, what I would propose in terms of an answer is that rather than looking for evil, or maybe in addition to looking for evil, we should be looking for abnormal. The fact of the matter is, user activity in an environment is fairly predictable. Users log on in the morning at relatively predictable times. They log off at the end of the day at relatively predictable times. And when they are working on their computers, they do what they need to do their job. So they do certain things which are also fairly predictable. Now, when a bad guy manages to compromise our environment, they don't know the environment. They don't understand the lay of the land. So they're not going to fall into that exact same pattern of predictable behavior. They're going to be looking around, trying to find opportunities to elevate their permissions, to move laterally throughout the environment, and to get access to whatever it is they're interested in on our networks. This behavior is decidedly abnormal. So what if instead of, or I should say in addition to, looking for evil, we look for abnormal? Now, there is an entire category of technology out there called user and entity behavioral analytics, and it attempts to do exactly what we're talking about here, which is identify normal and then detect abnormal actions. And typically the way that these things work is you implement them and you have them learn normal in your network for a period of time. And then once you kind of turn them on after they've learned normal, they start detecting abnormal. The problem with these is, well, there's actually kind of two issues. The first issue is as we look at these UEBA solutions, they can either be very broadly targeted or very narrowly focused. If you're talking about broadly analyzing the overall network activity in an environment, even in fairly small environments, this is really difficult to do. Every time you make a change in technology, every time you make a change in business or mission focus, even outside changes. When COVID happened, there was a significant change from people working on premises to people working remotely. All of those things can affect what normal looks like. Another simple example is a user goes on vacation overseas, they might log in at a time that is normally abnormal, that type of thing. So what is normal is subject to change, and if that does change in a legitimate way, we have to now retune our UEBA solution, particularly if it's very broadly focused. Now, what about a narrowly focused UEBA? So something that, for example, only looks at logins, which users log into which systems from which systems. That is also fairly static. It's pretty predictable. And it is a good indicator because if a bad guy gets on our network, they're going to attempt to log into systems that normally wouldn't be logged into by whatever user account they have. And that's all great. It's much easier to tweak and tune a very targeted UEBA solution. But the problem is you're only looking at logins, for example. Anything else that would be going on wouldn't show up. So, for example, if I'm the attacker and I know you have a login-focused UEBA solution, I'll just change my tactics and use exploits as opposed to trying to log into stuff. So, again, there's some challenges with this technology. It is sort of an up-and-coming one. It's definitely something to take a look at, but I think that there is an easier way to go about it, and that is redefining normal. The idea in this case is we are going to create resources in our environment. Now, by a resource, what we could be talking about is a file, a folder, a directory, a user account, a credential, an open port, a listening service, a full-blown computer. Heck, it could be a full-blown network of computers. But the key with these resources is that they have no other like normal production value. What this means is because these resources have no production value, normal becomes defined as no interaction, right? There is no interaction whatsoever, and that is normal. Any interaction or any use is by definition abnormal and would generate an alert. And that is sort of the core foundational concept of detection technologies that you will see, or deception, I should say, technologies that you will see out there today. We're going to create effectively deceptive resources. Any interaction with those resources is abnormal. We generate an alert. There have been studies out there that show that this type of technology, this approach to detecting through deception, can result in a 12 times improvement in the average number of days to detect attackers. I've seen another study that showed what's called the dwell time, the amount of time that the attacker is on our network before being detected, has been reduced from, in this one study, between 78 and 100 days down to 5.5 days. We also see a general perception of improved security when using deception. So there was a survey that was done. 70% of the survey respondents that were using deception rated their security as highly effective, whereas only 49% of sort of the general population viewed their security as highly effective. So really, really effective at doing a good job of detecting bad guys on our network quickly, accurately, reducing the amount of noise, and ultimately reducing the cost of data breaches, which is a really, really powerful tool. Now, that is sort of the basic introduction to cyber deception. There's actually quite a bit more to cyber deception that we're going to get into, but before we do so, I wanted to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the frequently asked questions that come up